Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Project 180's Strong Voices 5th season. I'm Barbara Richards. I'm the That's very kind. Thank you so much. I'm the founder and the CEO of Project 180. If I didn't have a chance to meet you before, I hope I'll get a chance to meet you afterwards. Welcome to Coming Home, the Effects of Incarceration and Reentry on the Family. The Strong Voices lecture series came about because we felt there was a need to create a bridge of understanding between citizens who are incarcerated and those of us on the outside. And the reason is so that the reentry process, instead of being very daunting as it is now, could be a lot smoother with a more welcoming public, and so that our community can be safer and also more prosperous when all of us are working together as citizens. Project 180 is very fortunate to have a very large group of family and friends, generous sponsors, foundations, and individuals who support the success of this series as well as the success of the organization. People often ask me why I started Project 180, and they often imagine that I have or have had a family member who was incarcerated. And it turns out that I have had a family member who was incarcerated, but I never knew him because he died in 1815. And so, fortunately, I have never experienced the financial, emotional, or practical stressors or stigma that come with having a loved one be arrested, incarcerated, and then re-enter the community. I started Project 180 because, like you coming here today, I heard something that triggered a response in me. And for me, it was hearing a national public radio show some years ago about the educational disparity between individuals who are incarcerated and individuals who are not. Listening to it, I knew that my life was going to go in a different direction from there on. Life goes in a different direction as well for families when a loved one is incarcerated. It not only does the son, the daughter, the parent, or the spouse do time, but the family does time as well. Today we're going to focus specifically on the impact for a family when a parent has been incarcerated. Our speaker, Professor Arditti from Virginia Tech, pioneered the field that studies parental incarceration and its effects, which is why we flew her here to speak to you today. We have a few copies of her groundbreaking book called Parental Incarceration and the Family, and they're for sale at our cost and out in the lobby afterwards, and she'll be available in the lobby to sign copies. A quick note about the remainder of the series. If you take a look at your little packet to the left of your plate, you'll see that we have a panel of family members of individuals who are or have been incarcerated on April 6th. That will be moderated by Joy Mailer of Big Brothers Big Sisters with Commissioner Nancy Dietert. And on May 11th, 2 days prior to Mother's Day, Heather Roberts will discuss her son's incarceration, reentry, and the struggles that they still face today in A Mother's Story. Judge Lee Hayworth will be in attendance for that and participating. So I hope you will join us. If you haven't signed up for tickets yet, they'll be available after the lecture. So there's a saying in our circles that we're all doing time. And our next speaker is no exception. he's done quite a bit of time on the bench. I'm extremely honored to welcome Chief Judge Charles E. Williams. Judge Williams was born in North Carolina, raised in St. Pete, and earned his law degree at the University of Florida, for which we will forgive him. He's received numerous awards, including, and for his service to the community, including an award that we've all heard of, which is the Sarasota Magazine Unity Award, and he received that for co-founding the Sarasota County Bar Association Diversity Committee. He participated last year in our series here at the Francis and introduced one of our speakers, and afterwards he was kind enough to join our honorary society, which is a cadre of local dignitaries who lend their names to Project 180 in support of our work. And he asked if he could come back this year and participate again, which we're very grateful for. And I would like to introduce and have you welcome Judge Williams.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm actually going to be introducing the speaker in a few moments, but I did want to acknowledge the impact that this program has. The last time I was here, I had the pleasure of introducing Calvin Duncan. Calvin Duncan was wrongfully convicted of a murder in Louisiana and spent, I believe, 28 years in Angola prison before he was exonerated. What I take from meeting Calvin was not only his grace, but something that he said that was quite ironic in a casual conversation that I had with him after he spoke. And it dealt with what the difficulty was in adjusting to life after spending well over 20 years in Angola prison. And he candidly said the hardest adjustment was that while he was in Angola, he worked every single day that he was there. He had a job, he had responsibilities, he had duties, and he was regimented, and he understood what he had to do every morning when he got up until he went to bed that night. And for the first time in his adult life, after he was released from Angola, he couldn't find work. He didn't have a job. And that was such a difficult adjustment for him that he almost became derailed. Fortunately, he was able to turn himself around, but when you think about the irony of that, to be able to work every single day, and I'm sure it included Saturdays and Sundays, but the only time he was unemployed was when he was released from prison. So we understand that how important reentry is and how important it is for we must support these programs which talk about something that we sometimes forget when we are happy with people who are released from prison or who are exonerated. But there's another chapter that they have to go through, and that is the adjustment on the outside. So, Barbara, we appreciate the work that you do in making that a part of the goal of coming back into society. So we appreciate that. I do want to let you know that one of the few things that both conservatives and liberals can agree upon is that we do need criminal justice reform. It's really kind of ironic, and it was pointed out at an event I attended, I think last month, that one of the few things that the ACLU and the Koch brothers can agree on is that there needs to be criminal justice reform, and that is very ironic. The court system recognizes that also, and although we are still flawed and not perfect, we do understand that there are many people that are incarcerated and many people who are arrested that are really in search of treatment. And the court system here, those of you who live in Sarasota, Manatee, you can rest assured that we think every day on what we can do to make certain that people who are in jail for the right reasons, and people that are in jail that need to be out are out. And so we have responded in a variety of ways. There are programs that have been in existence for a while. We have a drug court program. We have a veterans court program. We even have an early childhood court. And we have a comprehensive treatment court. All of these courts deal with issues that actually led to potential arrest, but at the same time, we understand that although the crimes were committed, the people committing these crimes aren't necessarily criminal. And we have responded with what we think is compassion and understanding. And in conjunction with that, We think that the agencies that assist us with that, the state attorney's office, the sheriff's office, the police department, the public defender's office, we all understand that it's very, very important for us to make certain that people can actually turn their life around. And I mention that and look at Judge McHugh, who doesn't know I'm going to mention her name. But we also have another court called Tyler Court, and Judge Malucci is here. Tyler Court stands for Turn Your Life Around. Again, recognizing that women, mostly women who are caught up in human trafficking and prostitution, need to have some mechanism to turn their life around. And although they are charged with these crimes, we recognize that in order to break that cycle, we must be able to address it. So the courts are very, very much aware of what needs to go on, and we see ourselves as partners with Project 180. There's a lot of things that are going on in Tallahassee, many of them dysfunctional, but some of the things are functional. Obviously, there's legislation as it relates to gun rights that are actively being debated. But before that, there was some real active legislation on criminal justice reform. And we need to be aware of the fact that even the legislature, and we have a rather conservative legislature here in Florida, if you haven't noticed, even the legislature recognizes that we need to take another look at how we deal with criminal justice matters. And so there's pending legislation now that is basically eliminating some of the minimum mandatory sentences. Hopefully this legislation will be passed, eliminating some of the minimum mandatory sentences that were imposed years ago on the war on drugs that have adversely impacted the prison population. Hopefully the legislature will give judges a little bit more discretion in deciding what can be done before someone is sent to jail or sent to prison. We hope that legislation passes. And basically giving people an opportunity to turn their lives around before they get on that vicious cycle of incarceration, release, incarceration, and release that we see so much today. So that is just to let you know what we're doing. And Project 180, again, is a critical component of that, because what happens when people are released determines really their fate probably within the first few days of their release from jail or prison. So it's important that that is addressed. And so the theme of this year's Project 180 lecture series, Coming Home, the Impact of Incarceration and Reentry on the Family, is extremely, extremely important. And so, it is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Joyce Arditti. Dr. Arditti has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Child and Family Studies from the University of Georgia. Coming from the University of Florida, that's kind of a rivalry, but I'll ignore that. She has a Master's in Human Development and Family Relations from the University of Connecticut, and a PhD in Family Studies from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Dr. Arditti is a professor of human development at Virginia Tech. Her research interests include family disruption, parent-child relationships in vulnerable families, and public policy. Her scholarship is recognized nationally and abroad, and she has published numerous empirical and review articles in therapy, human services, family studies, and criminal justice journals. Her book, Parental Incarceration and the Family, was the winner of the 2014 Outstanding Book Award presented by the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. The United States has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. This book reminds us that over 2% of U.S. children under the age of 18 have a parent in prison. The book also brings a family perspective to our understanding of what it means to have so many of our nation's parents in prison. There is simply no one more qualified on this issue than our speaker today. So please welcome Dr. Joyce Arditti.
Thank you, Judge Williams, for that lovely introduction. And I just want to thank Barbara for bringing me here today. It's an honor to be here with all of you, and I look forward to our question answer period. I've got to get used to this little piece of equipment here. So I'm just going to go very quickly through some basic statistics. Probably all of us have some awareness of of where things stands, but just to give you a sense of the big picture in terms of the context of mass incarceration in the United States. And you'll see in this beautiful picture here, this is the most up-to-date numbers that we have in terms of the number of folks that are actually locked up. What I like about this figure, or really what I find tragic about this figure, is actually higher than what many of us think, because this particular figure includes local jails, detention centers, and the like. So you get a sense of how broad the scope of this issue is and how many people are confined to our nation's prisons, jails, and detention centers. Of these numbers, we don't have really good data on how many people are actually parents. Most of us use a statistic from 2008 because that's all that is available. And what we know is about 52% of state prisoners and 63% of federal prisoners are parents. So that's a lot of people that are locked up that also have children as well. This also gives you another visual. I'm a very visual person, so I like to look at pictures to help understand what's happening. Of the number of parents and children that are affected by having a parent behind bars. The figure you're probably familiar with, again, is not the most recent figure because we don't have that data, but it's about 2.7 million children have a parent who's incarcerated. In Florida, about 8% of Florida children have a parent incarcerated. That's 312,000 children in the state of Florida. So Florida's in the mid-range of that. The worst state is Kentucky, the best state is New York in terms of the proportion of children. You'll see how dramatic the trend is as you look over the decade of the 90s and where we are now. I also wanted to highlight that racial disparity. We often talk a lot about the racial disparity in terms of who's locked up in our nation's prisons, but it also trickles down and it affects families. And this is particularly an issue for families, African American families. About twice as high the percentage of black children as white children have experienced parental incarceration. So that's really about 1 in 9 African American children compared to about 1 in 17 white children. So the literature is pretty clear that parental incarceration is a risk for children, and I could spend probably 3 hours talking to you about why that is. So I'm going to try to crystallize that as quickly as I can. But very little research really, I was actually thinking about the issue of reentry when I was preparing for this talk, and really couldn't find any research that looks at the implications of reentry for families. So that's a little bit of a trickier issue. We are just now, developing a really solid literature that looks at the implications of parental incarceration for children. So again, not to be overly negative, but some of the highlights of the literature on the effects of parental incarceration on children, hit on some of these outcomes, including children's antisocial behavior or externalizing behavior, psychological and behavioral difficulties, traumatic symptomology and loss. Some of my own research hits on that area, and then certain health vulnerabilities that can extend into adulthood as well. So we've got a pretty clear picture that parental incarceration is associated with these negative child outcomes, even though there is some disagreement among scholars as to exactly why. So I assured Barbara that I would bring in some case studies, and so I want to talk to you a little bit about Tandis and Jenna. These are pseudonyms for folks that have been in my own research studies to kind of highlight some of these vulnerabilities of children. 15-year-old Tandis reports never living with her dad, although her mother states he resided with them until Tandis was about 6. Tandis's mother describes her own relationship with the father as non-existence. Tandis's mother brought the children to see their father in jail about once or twice a month when Tandis was younger. Tandis tells us she enjoyed visiting him while he was in jail. She describes the visits as fun and games and reported consistent phone and letter contact throughout his incarceration. Candace did not know the reason for her father's confinement, but said he was much nicer when he was in jail. He's mean now. Upon release, her father lived with them for a while and then left. He currently lives about an hour away from Candace, but she characterizes their relationship as up and down and hasn't seen him for months, so we defined his involvement as sporadic. She told us, "I don't care about him anymore. I'm done trying with him." Candace's 13-year-old younger sister, Jenna, copes a little differently with her father's sporadic involvement. She openly mourns him and also mourns what she imagines they might do together. When I asked her what she would do with her father, Jenna told me, "I can't experience what it's like to have a father, to have fun, to get to do things, have ice cream and go to the woods." Jenna finds some consolation spending time with her stepfather. I included this space because it shows, I think, some of the complexities associated with incarceration and reentry. It's ironic to me that the children had more contact with their father while he was incarcerated than upon his release. That kind of highlights the complexities of what happens when somebody goes through the system and comes back out. It may not be that happy reunification we all hope for. One of the strongest findings in the literature is that incarceration is associated with the material hardship of families. We have very, very good data from a variety of sources telling us two things: that most U.S. prisoners come from a history of disadvantage, and that incarceration actually intensifies disadvantage. It's very costly to families for a number of reasons, but that the important point here in the limited time that I have is that these disadvantages extend to children of the incarcerated who risk experiencing homelessness and food insecurity and housing instability and other forms of disadvantage that, based on very sophisticated statistical analysis, tell us are actually caused by incarceration. So that's a takeaway point, that we do know that parental incarceration seems to intensify any pre-existing disadvantage. Here's another picture, big on pictures, that show how youth experience material hardship using the Ad Health data set. And you can see that in the column that has the incarcerated parent is the red column. You can see that families in the red column need more social assistance, are more likely to be officially poor, have difficulty paying bills, and difficulty accessing medical care. And there's good evidence to suggest, again, that it could be a pre-existing problem, but it also can be intensified. So another irony in our system is not only the costs associated with parental incarceration, but it often can drive people onto public assistance. So it's kind of a double whammy in terms of how much it costs. We also know that parental incarceration is linked to children's exposure to adversity, or ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. And there's some very good data on that. What scientists sometimes disagree about is whether parental incarceration is the cause of this or simply it is a co-occurring risk. What we seem to know is that children with a parent in prison are exposed to these very traumatic incarceration-related risks, like a parental arrest, trauma that might be associated with visiting in a jail or a prison facility, etc. We also know that ACEs compromise development, and there's very good research showing that this can extend into young adulthood and even is linked to a higher incidence of mortality. Here's another graphic from the Ad Health data that shows us how in the red column are children with an incarcerated parent, and it shows us they are much more likely to be exposed to a variety of ACEs, including socioeconomic hardship, parental separation, parental death, domestic abuse, neighborhood violence, mentally ill or suicidal person, substance abuse, and racial discrimination. ACEs, basically a takeaway, is they're bad for development. Just want to share with you Lynn's story. Lynn was reincarcerated at the time of our interview. She had 3 children, aged 7, 5, and 2. Her story highlights a history of disadvantage triggered by her mother's incarceration. She tells us, "When I was 13, my mother too was incarcerated. I was without the one who was my life, my role model. I didn't know how to deal with that, so I turned to what would numb the feelings I was having, alcohol. When my mother left, I was a child going towards life with the best of intentions to succeed. When she got home, I was headed for destruction." Lynn tells me how she started drinking at the time of her beloved grandmother's death to cope with the grief. Each time the binge drinking embraced was a means for her to alleviate her emotional pain, was an important pathway for Lynn's criminalized drug-related behavior. As a teenager, Lynn got involved with a much older man who was also the father to her children and who was a drug dealer and also perpetrated physical and emotional abuse against Lynn. So Lynn is a real case study in terms of some of these intergenerational risks. Her own mother was incarcerated when she was 13, and then that was a real turning point in her life that led to her involvement in her with this man that was not a good person, and her own substance abuse. And she was we interviewed her twice, and she was reincarcerated at the second interview. I always try to bring in some good news. It's not all bad news. Positive outcomes are possible to the extent that incarceration removes an abusive or neglectful parent, or the incarcerated parent gain resources while in prison. So prison time can be a wake-up call for parents, and children's care arrangement might improve after incarceration. And we also know some families are especially resilient. I like to share the story of Lucy. She had an engaged father who was previously incarcerated, and she was thriving. She illustrates how incarceration can serve as a turning point and give rise to engaged fathering. Her mom was a professional with an associate degree and described Lucy as unconditionally loving. Lucy's father was briefly incarcerated for failure to pay child support. And Lucy describes her own relationship with the father as excellent. And this is a real critical family process, as if co-parents are connected. His involvement over the past year, which included regular child support, had been consistent. And Lucy felt close to her father. She saw him frequently, and they talked or texted daily. She described sleepovers at his big blue house as a lot of fun and liked playing with her half-siblings. Other studies do provide us with evidence of youth competence even in the face of parental incarceration, particularly qualitative studies that examine coping of youth with a parent in prison. Sometimes youth employ creative and resourceful coping strategies, and many children are actually doing okay even in the context of parental incarceration. But just the fact that some children are doing okay is never a reason to do nothing. Robert told me it was normal for him not to have a father. Robert's a 16-year-old man that was in one of my studies, and he was one of those kids that was doing okay. However, he told us that his father had been in and out of prison several times for various drug offenses, and he also didn't want to talk about why his father was in prison. I think it was something really bad. And so I told Robert, you don't have to tell me. Anyway, he told me, I feel like it's pretty normal as an African-American male not to have a father around. This normative perspective, along with family support and alternative adult relationships, on the one hand is a little sad, but on the other hand really might have promoted Robert's resilience. He was also in the Big Brothers program. all of us intuitively know that strong families help children. So it's not so much the family structure, but it's what goes on in families. And there's three biggies that really promote resilience among children. One is caregiver and family stability. Again, I don't have time to unpack that further for you, but we do know parental incarceration can really complicate that and link to instability. Caregiver quality is crucial, just like it is when families face any kind of stressful experience. And then positive family contact experiences. That I could probably spend 3 hours talking to you about, but not all contact experiences with incarcerated parents are the same. And so anything that we can do to enhance the quality of those visits or those experiences so that they're less stressful for families is a positive step. We also know that non-incarcerated caregivers, whether they're single or repartner, do engage in strategies to keep children safe. And I have some examples about that. For example, Suzanne was a mother in my study, and she told us, we just moved, so we're sort of in transition, and my daughter's making new friends. Right now, I'm going to the old neighborhood and picking them up and bringing them to my house, because that's another single-parent household that I think has way bigger challenges than me. Another mother, Tanya, told me, I keep her daughter, so close. The kids, have a 4-house radius. You can't get past the 4th house. And my house is on the corner, so you just can't go past the end of the block. But you don't know what other parents are doing. I have friends or associates who live in other areas in the neighborhood. Their kids, they tell me some of the things that their kids do. I'm like, you know what? That's all right. You could just stay home. That's what she tells her kids. So I really like to highlight evidence of strong parenting because I think there's a lot of stigma about single parents. And we have evidence, particularly in the qualitative studies, that single parents engage in some very positive family caregiving strategies. Karen is another mother who talks about writing instead of visiting. And she says that prison visits can be very hard on her children. She's a recent reentrant mother of 4 and recounted that when she was in prison, the visits from her older daughter, now 11, were very emotionally upsetting, and that her child would cry at the end of the visit because she could not leave and return home with her mother. She said, I understand why my daughter didn't come. The visit changed her mood, so the visit upset me, upset my daughter. I would write instead. I wanted to, in my last few minutes, talk a little bit about reentry. And we know that at least 700,000 offenders are released from confinement. That's in 2010. Real hard to find out what's happening in 2017. There's multiple barriers to reintegration, which I'm sure many of you already know about. And there are also invisible punishments, which limit the access to resources and opportunities for reentrants. We know that 4 in 10 reentrants return to state prison within 3 years of release. I also wanted to show you how many releases there are, and they're about the same as the number of admissions. So it is a bit of a revolving door, and we have really criminalized very broad classes of people in our society. We are a criminalized society. We know that reentry might even be more challenging for mothers who often have very distinct plans to reunify with their children. Also, many mothers were primary caregivers prior to their imprisonment. Karen recalled that when she was released from prison, I came home to nothing, no clothes, no possessions. I had nothing for my daughter's birthday. I don't want her to know. So there's a lot of shame there. When Carol, reincarcerated at the time of her second interview, thought about a future with her children outside of prison walls, she was pessimistic. She told me, I don't have a pot to piss in, let alone a home for my children. Faith described a frenetic state of financial instability after being released from prison. She told me, I'm the one responsible for all the bills now. I got to take care of the kids, you know. If they need something, want something, keep food in the house, gas in the car, just day to day. That's stressful enough. So add to that what we already know in terms of the typical invisible punishments that are connected to reentry. And that involves denying access of certain resources that other people have access to, like educational loans, social and physical mobility. And so the burden of care is placed on families, which can add stress to already under-resourced families. Here are some case exemplars of invisible punishments that I can offer you. Carol told us a really poignant story, and she was a reentrant mother. She says, when I got my nursing license, I was the happiest person. You see, all the jobs that need nursing. I set up an interview and went out there, and I could see it on the woman's face. As soon as she saw that I was black, she made all these excuses why they couldn't hire me. I should never have let that be my downfall. I was only looking for some reason to relapse, and that just put the icing on the cake. Karen told us, I had seen so many women come in and out of prison, and I was like, God, what's wrong with y'all? If I get out this time, y'all ain't got to worry about me coming back. And then I got home, and I'm like, I can't deal with this. Send me back to prison because you're looking for a job, and you're just all of these things. I mean, I came home to nothing. So families of reentrants are heavily relied upon for housing, financial, and emotional support and assistance navigating employment. Reentrants' dependence on family can contribute to their family stress because it can create a great deal of financial strain and anxiety for family members. They need, they may help family members out of a sense of obligation. Female kin are especially heavily relied upon. And on the other hand, family members that say they express strong support of reentrants, they want to provide help, but it still can be very stressful, and it's particularly hard for under-resourced, vulnerable families. Reentry programs like Project 180 are very important because they can extend help to family members. Typically, family members request services that help the reentrant rather than themselves, and often they would benefit for some help themselves. Reentry and the time leading up to it is a very sensitive period in terms of intervention. Family support is critically important during this time. And when I say family, I mean that in a very broad sense. In other words, reentrants may define family members who are not blood kin. We call them quasi-kin. And so it may not be blood ties or the typical people you would think of when we talk about family. And so it's very important to allow reentrants to identify who they consider family. The link between parenthood and desistance has been made in the research. In other words, parenthood makes reincarceration costlier. So states and governments are interested in strengthening family ties. It's got me a little aggravated as a family scientist because now it's like we made such a huge mess and now we're looking to the family to solve it. And families can't solve this problem all by themselves. I'm going to close with Pam's case. She's staying out of trouble. She's a mother and a recent reentrant, and she reflected on the hurt she believes she inflicted on her children as a result of her incarceration as reason enough to do everything she could do to successfully complete her probation. She told me, the past and my children's distress, for me, that stops me from doing something stupid in the future because I never want to be incarcerated again. My final slide, we don't have time, but I wanted to provide this link. This is a program I really like that's very holistic and really draws the family in and around the reentrant and provides wraparound services to reentrants. But I think any program that capitalizes on reentrant strengths, that facilitates interagency collaborations, that offers opportunity for reentrants to develop new identities. They're called redemptive scripts out in the field and in science, are good programs because often we come in as well-meaning rescuers without really asking reentrants, what do you need? And that's why so many programs don't work, because they really don't fit the target population that we're trying to work with. And so that's why local programs are probably the most effective, because they're the closest to the community and they're the closest to the reentrance families in terms of, listening to those voices in terms of what people need that they feel would be most useful to them. Thank you very much. I hope I... Thank you.
So you listed off, okay, thank you. You listed off states that have different proportions of inmates who have families or parents.
Right.
You said New York was the lowest, Kentucky was the highest.
Proportionately. In other words, the percentage of children. Doesn't mean New York has fewer inmates who are parents, but when you look at the proportion of the population. So it's a little bit of a tricky statistic, but it helps level it between the states so you get a sense of which states have the highest proportion of children with an incarcerated parent.
Okay, so my question is the difference substantial, and is there any relationship between that statistic and the availability of birth control, education and just availability?
I can't answer the question about birth control. I can eyeball the states again. I did see some trouble in the Southeast, as we would expect. And some of the states that have more punitive policies. What I do think there is a connection is between that and sentencing. So for example, New York, if you had looked at that maybe 10 years ago, would be a different percentage. Right now it's 4% of their children. But they've also dropped their Rockefeller laws. And so their sentencing has changed. California is starting to shift as well. So I think it is clearly linked to policies with regard to sentencing and sentence length. But I think that's an intriguing question. My instinct would tell me that states that have more progressive policies around sentencing might also have more progressive policies around reproductive rights. And, one of my thoughts based on the science that I'm aware of is anytime you can provide access for family planning and things like that, that tends to be a positive thing, particularly for disadvantaged families, to make use of those services.
Are drugs the main cause for incarceration?
It really drove prison growth, particularly in the federal system during the 1990s. So I think about 14%, I'd have to go look at the picture in terms of, but it's usually somewhere around 15% if you look at states in terms of why people are incarcerated. They may have something like nonviolent drug. And the categories are so crude, so it's really hard to know, how much drug policies are a driver of incarceration. But most experts agree that it is a major factor in the increase in prison populations in the past 20 years. The federal system used to be really small, and now it's fairly significant. In the state systems, you have a category called violent crime that's really tricky because it could be drug-related, but every state is different in terms of how they define violent crime. So when I think of violent crime, I think of a mass shooter or what have you, or assault, but it could be that it's a drug-related offense or a non-violent drug-related offense, but there may be a gun on the premises or something like that. So it's very tricky to get a handle, but most experts agree that it is a major factor driving prison growth.
Did you study, or what can you tell us about the relationship between the type of crime for which someone was incarcerated and the effect on the children?
That's a great question. There is not a lot of work in that area that looks at that. What I do know is there were a few studies that suggested that nonviolent drug offenders were more socially integrated than other types of offenders. And I use the word offender just sticking with corrections lingo. I don't use that term in my own work. But basically, that's a really good question. I think it's kind of like my students, when we talk about drug use, and I try to impart to them that, let's be precise in our terms. And my students, they're learning, so they'll say things like drug addicts. And I'll say, okay, are you talking about a drug user? And just because somebody uses drugs or even is addicted to drugs doesn't necessarily equate that they're a terrible parent. And it is a risk factor for parenting difficulties. But it doesn't, just like parental depression is, but it doesn't always equate. And so I think that's a really good question. I mean, my instincts tell me, you'd have to look at the whole picture and whether the criminal activity is connected, what kind of connection it is to what somebody's doing in the home. And that's what we know least about, and that's why I'm considered like this pioneer, because previous to my work, there really wasn't any work looking at family processes. So the good news, and that's another lecture I give, is there are family processes that can mitigate harm. And it's not necessarily you have to be married or, oh, you're single. But, how is it that children are cared for in their day-to-day life? What are their schools like? What are their friends like? And so those day-to-day interactions, which are called proximal processes, that really bears heavily on how well children do. I don't know if I answered the question, but it's a great question, and we need to know more. And just because somebody's in prison, we know over half of incarcerated parents were in residence with at least one of their children. And over half of incarcerated fathers report being a primary breadwinner, contributing to children's financial well-being. So we know incarcerated parents, some of them are doing things that good, responsible parents do.
Good afternoon, Dr. Arditti. Thank
Hi.
you for being with us today.
You're welcome.
The slide that you have up, your strengths-based intervention, are there any community models or areas that you would point to as good examples of integrating all four components?
Yes, there's the La Bodega model in New York, the Family Justice Project. I can't speak to the status of that project today, but a few years back they had a really great model program, and their recidivism rates were really low. And what they did is they engaged families right from the beginning. And I would say there's some models in Maryland as well. There's a mediation program in parts of Maryland where the reentrant has an opportunity to work with a mediator, and they choose who their, quote, family is to develop a reentry reunification plan. Barbara and I were talking yesterday. It's not uncommon for incarcerated parents to idealize what's going to happen at reentry and what kind of parent they're going to be. And there's a lot of barriers and challenges, particularly in the face of a long sentence, in terms of whether the family's moved on, whether the caregiver has repartnered. Children have changed, and there's a lot of emotions. So I think, letting reentrants identify who they're connected to at the time of reentry, it may not be the traditional family that we think about. I think, I have a slide. I had to cut it because I was trying to stay within the 25 minutes, but it's one of my favorite slides. It's a picture of a giant elephant, and it's called The Elephant in the Room. So the elephant in the room is mass incarceration. The real issue is we should not be incarcerating people at the rate we are. And so it should be a last resort. Then, for those people that are incarcerated, really working with them early on to help make those connections with family and to develop a reentry plan that focuses on the voices. It can't just be the reentrant either. You have to look at what the family needs or the people that reentrant is connected to. In work on fathers, what we've seen is often, there's 2 points here. One, they're connected to the least angry girlfriend. So it's whoever, and I say that with, I come from a complex family. I'm a complex parent. So I say that with utter humility. But often people have children in different households and different partners. That doesn't equate with dysfunction necessarily. And so, it's kind of like which girlfriend is going to bring which child. The other thing we've noticed is as parents tend to be more connected to the youngest child or the last child that they lived with. And so it could be that that's a starting point, is that least angry caregiver, the youngest child, the one that they have the ones that they have the most It's actually more unusual to find an incarcerated parent that has a nuclear family structure. It exists, and it's not necessarily better or worse. But we have to kind of get in reality and let reentrants and families have a voice in terms of what they envision.
Dr. Arditti, we're actually out of time for our Q&A. I'm so sorry. We'll do one quick question here because I know you had your hand up for a long time. Sorry, Sharon.
I wonder if we just had everybody knows this school shooting here in Florida, and right after it happened, there was a lot of information about the fact that most mass shooters come from single-parent families. And it offended me because I'm a single parent, but I wonder if you looked at any sort of cross-cultural kind of looking at folks who are in prison versus, just the population in general in terms of how those folks, single-parent folks, how their children commit crimes.
I think that's a great question, and I'm a single parent myself. The United States is not the best country to be a single parent in. So much of it is the cultural context. There's some new international research that came out, and you see some of these profound differences in the United States, so it's easy to say, oh man, those single parents, gosh, we just need to stop that. When you look at countries like Denmark, for example, there's not any difference between children in single-parent households and children in two-parent households because of their safety net and the culture there. It's not a stigmatized arrangement. In the United States, it's a relatively stigmatized arrangement, and it's connected with poverty. Whereas in Denmark, being a single parent is not connected to poverty. It's not correlated. Here, it's highly correlated. So the cultural context, this is a hard country to be a single parent in. And so if you unpack family processes, just because somebody's a single parent doesn't mean their children are doomed. But it's a riskier arrangement in the United States because of how we deliver safety net. In my book, or maybe it was a more recent chapter, I did look at differences among states in terms of safety net and how easy it is to access public assistance, et cetera. So even within the United States, you see variation in terms of family well-being based on what kind of state you're in. Some states, and that can actually, believe it or not, in contrast to what you might hear from Washington, these programs can help offset, along with employment, or child support can help offset poverty. So single parenthood is intertwined with poverty in the United States. It's not the same in other countries.
On that note, Dr. Arditti, thank you so much. This was brilliant. Thank you. There are a lot of takeaways from today, aren't there? One of mine is the material hardship and how that is compounded once one gets out. Material hardship for families when an individual is incarcerated or a breadwinner is incarcerated, and then once one gets out, that is certainly compounded by the difficulties one faces in reentry. So I want to talk about Project 180's mission and vision for just a quick minute. At Project 180, our mission that we seek to reintegrate formerly incarcerated citizens into community life, and our vision to reduce poverty, homelessness, unemployment, and criminal behavior among formerly incarcerated citizens are more than just words. They're words that we live by through our programs. Those programs include a financial literacy course, a very highly practical workforce education class, an information and referral service, which interestingly enough is utilized mostly by individuals who are family members of people who are about to get out. We refer them to housing and employment throughout the state, and an upcoming residential program for men. We also have a program that is new and that is very dear to our hearts, and it has kind of a certain magical quality to it. The reason for that is because of the woman who runs it. She's a woman I'd like to introduce to you now. She has master's degrees in social work and counseling, has co-authored a book, was a career columnist for the New York Post, and provided executive coaching at the corporate level for 35 years. We met over lunch at Tiger Bay about a year ago, and she was immediately interested in Project 180. And that interest has turned to a deep passion and commitment, which will become quite evident to you in just a moment. Please welcome with me, Judy Rose Marin.
Thank you, Barbara, so much. And thank everybody for showing up today and taking a stand about something that's really important. I knew nothing about incarceration when Barbara asked me to help begin a support circle for people who had been released from prison and or their family members. In that moment, I felt honored. I am honored in that moment. And immediately, I also start making movies in my mind. You can imagine stereotypes of ex-felons, imagining large, looming men coming through the doorway, sitting around in a circle with perhaps menacing or even defiant attitudes. With no experience of this population, I look at my 2 master's degrees, years of coaching, running groups, and I say to myself, what in the world could I possibly offer to people so unfamiliar to me? Judy, we'll get there early. I'll help you set up, Barbara says to me. Okay, my cranial woodpecker is still working. It says, what if somebody gets upset or violent? What happens if I want to leave early? Stomach butterflies multiply. Do I dare tell Barbara that I'm a little nervous? Barbara, thank you very much. I'm very honored, but I think I'm a bit nervous. Deep down, I think, you just blew a job offer. Barbara says, why don't you share that with the group when we meet? They need to know that. Exactly. I said to myself, what? I was sure she was going to tell me, don't worry, nothing to fear, you know, it's all be okay. But to share? Would I? Could I? Dare I expose my vulnerabilities? September 21st, 2017. I arrive early, and Barbara walks in the door with 2 women, 2 new members. As soon as I see their faces, my fears dissolve, and we warmly welcome each other, and now my worries are transformed into like childlike excitement as to who else is going to come through the door. What I can tell you as I stand here now is that no criminals came in. Only men and women, people like me, people like you. Sitting in the circle, we introduce ourselves, and stories are shared about the enormous challenges re-entering society. Shame, embarrassment, frustrations in finding work, still being imprisoned in their own minds. Touched by what I hear, and with only 10 minutes left, I decide to share a wee bit more. I confess that I was a bit nervous at first, but since listening to and learning about everybody, I now only see a father, a mother, a sister, a son, a brother. And I add, and I see each of you as amazing and inspiring people. It's almost magical. The young man to my right turns to me and asks, may I hold your hand while I share what I have to say? Without a blink of a thought, I extend my right hand into his. Thank you for your honesty, he says, because that's what this group is all about. I just got to know more about you, Judy. What we all need to do is learn about each other and not live in fear of things we don't know or let our misconceptions mistakenly guide us. From both sides, we need to get to know one another. He continues to share his story as our hands hold still until he finishes, and my heart melts. 6 months later, right now, our support circle, continues to help re-entering men and women feel safe, build self-esteem, network, find and land jobs, we have statistics, deepen trust, and rebuild lives of independence and resilience, step by step. Just imagine the strength and the courage that it takes to re-enter this society after however long you've been there, re-entering with perhaps only the clothes that you were arrested in, starting there. Our members of the group share with one another that one person said, "This group is better than my mandated anger management group. I feel better already." Others say, "I don't feel alone when I'm here." And a feeling shared by everyone, including me, is Thursdays have become an important part of my week. Oh, and the moment that man held my hand, it wasn't until I got home that night and realized that not only did he seem to need to hold my hand for his needs, but that I too needed my hand held in that moment. In that moment, it wasn't about degrees. In that moment, I was present. And in that moment, I learned that people are not their crimes. Maybe it's what we all need to do. Hold each other's hands and hold each other's hearts so that together we can help fellow citizens move past their pasts, create new meaning and purpose in their lives, and let them know that they always have a seat in Project 180's support circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judy, for sharing that very powerful story. I feel like I have just a little bit of an idea of what it might be like to go through the pain and struggles of reentry just by you sharing what it was like to be in that room with people and helping them. And it also gives me encouragement to know that just ordinary people like us, we can do something to help Project 180 and people who are reentering. And thank you, Joyce, for sharing your wealth of information. I feel like I have a glimpse or just a little bit of an idea of the magnitude and scope of the problem. And I think there's something we can do with that in mind. And thank you, Judge Williams, for letting us know that there's a lot going on in the legislature right here in the state of Florida, and there is something we can do. Contact your senators and representatives and let them know how important this issue is to you as constituents. So my name's Wendy Cox, and I am a volunteer with Project 180, and my husband and I are financial supporters and members of the Founders Circle at Project 180. And I don't know about you, but I love sitting back and listening and learning about something like incarceration and what's happening in our community and around the nation. And then I feel like I want to do something. Like, is there something that I could do, something that I could do to help? I want to become a better informed citizen. I want to be a problem solver. I want to be part of the solution. And I also want to help people get a fresh start on life, because people need a fresh start on life. So I'm here right now for the next few minutes to tell you how you can be engaged with Project 180 and how you can help, because we don't want you leaving this luncheon wondering, what can I do? because there's a lot you can do. Barbara is the sole staff member at Project 180, and she has a team of really dedicated volunteers, many of whom are here today, and we need more people to help us with this. And so what I'm going to ask you to do right now is you have this lovely blue envelope on your tables. I think you know where this is going. In the envelope, there are 2 cards, all right? So, don't be confused by the 2 cards. I want you to take out the card that has boxes to check on the back, okay? Not the one with the logos on the back. Take out the card with the boxes on the back. But let's look at the front of the card that has the Project 180 logo. It says, "Please join our cause and donate today. Thank you." So, if you want to help Project 180, probably the fastest and easiest way to help Project 180 today is to make a donation. And you can do that today by just filling out the front of this card and putting it in the envelope. But we have a few board members here who will take these cards. You can give your envelope and your card to me or to Barbara or we have a few board members here, Tom and Tracy and Monica. Would you raise your hands? You can give your envelopes to them when you're done. But you can simply, if you don't have time to volunteer, and I know a lot of your time is limited, you can simply donate and dash. So if you want to just fill out the front of that card and get out of here quickly, just go ahead and do that. We don't mind. Donate, dash, and you're done. Now, if you have a little bit more time and you think, there might be something I can do. I mean, Judy never thought there was anything she could do to help with Project 180, but we've heard her story, and certainly she's made a huge impact. If you look at the back of your card, there are boxes to check. So check a box. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but there might be something on that list that interests you, intrigues you, makes you want to ask more questions about what would it mean for me to get involved with Project 180 in this way. So check a box and then ask questions later. We'll call you, we'll discuss it with you. But imagine this, what if you are the person that we need to help us this year? What if you are that person? So check a box and we'll explore that possibility and see if we can find a good fit for you with Project 180. And of course, there are 2 more lunches this year, the first Friday in April and the first Friday in May. Oh, second Friday in May. First Friday in April, second Friday in May. Come to another lunch, hear more about Project 180 from people in our community, and bring a friend, bring a new friend. Maybe they want to check a box. And call your legislators and make sure that they know that over-incarceration is an important issue in the state of Florida. And let them know that there's something they can do to change what's happening in here. Because Joyce, I think you said 8% of children in the state of Florida have a parent who's incarcerated. At some point. That number's too big. Let's do something about that. Okay, now, one more thing. I don't want to complicate matters, but you got a second card in your envelope. So now you all should have the first card completely filled out by now. I want you to set a good example for people at your table. Don't be shy. There's pens, everything. Fill out the card. We need to know who you are. And the second card deals with the Giving Challenge. So it says on the top, support Project 180 through the Giving Challenge. Now, our community every year on one day has a Giving Challenge. It's 24 hours. It starts on May 1st. It's a specific day that our local community foundations match donations. All right? So if you are going to make a gift today and want your donation matched, I'll have you fill out the second card with your donation, and we're going to hold it until May 1st, because on that specific day is the day we have to submit our donations in order to have it matched. So they're matched for every $100 gift, there is a $100 match. So here's how that works. If you give $100 today, they'll match $100. Well, that's $200. That's a nice gift. If you give $1,000 today, they'll also match $100. So that's a much better deal. Give $1,000, and that becomes $1,100. And for those of you who are here today every $1 million gift is matched $100. So that's $1,100,000 for those gifts. So don't hold back. Donate whatever you want today. And I want to thank you for all the donations that have already been made. Many of you have sponsored tables, you bought tickets, you have donated to Project 180. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you for coming today. So with that, as you're busy writing on your cards, I'm going to bring Barbara back up for a couple closing remarks.
Thank you, Wendy, and Judy, thank you as well. I didn't get a chance to say thank you. Wendy, just very quickly, Wendy was once characterized as, when God made Wendy, he broke the mold. And she is truly a great gift to our community and to Project 180, and we appreciate you very much. So while you all are making your gifts to Project 180, I just wanted to bring this home, this conversation home, to the Minnesota area. Because those who come home to our community face the things in Project 180's vision: poverty, homelessness, and unemployment, and it's far more common than you might imagine. Every week, 5 people come home to Sarasota County from state prison. Every week. And every week, another 7 people come home to Manatee County. We know from Dr. Arditti's speech that slightly over half, 52%, are parents. Prison is the modern form of banishment. And in our culture, once that banishment ends, unfortunately, these citizens experience ongoing social and economic exclusion and marginalization that affects not only their life trajectories, but also those of their families and their children. These citizens who are returning need safe, affordable housing. They need living wage jobs. They need someone to call for information and support. And they need a new start on life. Project 180 meets those needs, and we'll soon be meeting them in even greater depth through our residential program. We want to thank you for your generosity. I know that we're out of time. I want to thank you for supporting this series by being here, for your generous donations today, and for your faith in Project 180. We'll see you in April and in May. And please remember, you can bring someone with you. Let's really spread the word about what's going on in our community. And you can purchase the centerpieces, Dr. Arditti's book, out in the lobby if you'd like, and she will be out there to sign the book. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for being here.